Updates on Wikileaks and Edward Snowden, SSL encryption isn't as safe as it seems, and lawmakers are trying to fix surveillance programs. All that and more this time on Threatwire. Hello and welcome to this episode of Threatwire. I'm Shannon Morse. This week, my co-host Darren Kitchen is hacking his way across the West Coast. And this is your summary of what's threatening security, privacy, and internet freedom. Let's start it off with an update from Edward Snowden, the NSA whistleblower who recently released information on PRISM. He's left Hong Kong and is seeking refuge and asylum in Ecuador and Iceland. Now, while his current whereabouts are unknown by the U.S. government and those involved, Snowden has received help from Wikileaks and their founder, Julian Assange. Assange has said that his departure from Hong Kong was completely legal. The U.S. did attempt to detain him, but their request didn't comply with Hong Kong's laws. Now, speaking of WikiLeaks, newly released court records show that the full Gmail account of a WikiLeaks volunteer was issued a search warrant by the Justice Department. The target was Herbert Snorrason of Iceland, who helped manage WikiLeaks' secure chat room in 2010. The U.S. government used an amendment to the Stored Communications Act to receive data from 3 other WikiLeaks associates and another ruling for Snorrason's Gmail account. They did not need to show a probable cause to receive the search warrants. Snorrason wrote, "Because I talked to Julian Assange, all information held by Google relating to my user account with them can be handed over to the U.S. prosecutors. How is this reasonable? How is this a particular description? How, in short, is this valid under the U.S. Bill of Rights? I'd really like someone to explain that to me." And he goes on about punching people in the face. Now let's pick it up with Darren.
Thanks, Shannon. Now, SSL, or Secure Sockets Layer, or known to many as simply HTTPS or the lock icon in the address bar, it does a fine job of protecting everything from, well, your social network logins, online shopping, online banking, today. But what about tomorrow? Now, the title of a report from Netcraft sums it up nicely. SSL interception today, decrypt tomorrow. Now, SSL and later TLS hit the scene way back in 1995 as a way to secure web traffic using public and private keys, very similar to PGP encryption for email like we talked about last week. And since inception, it's done a fair job of protecting web traffic from would-be snoopers. That is, of course, until nation states start poking at the protocol. For example, last month, security researcher Moxie Marlinspike reported on a Saudi Arabian program of intercepting SSL traffic, including, quote, compelling the certificate authority in a jurisdiction of the UAE or Saudi Arabia to produce SSL certificates so they could be used for interception. And if you're thinking this wouldn't affect us, or the United States, well then think again. It turns out sites identified in the NSA PRISM surveillance program are using weak SSL implementations. The only thing that the PRISM program would need to crack the crypto intercepted by the likes of Facebook and Twitter, Yahoo, AOL, Apple, Google, and others, or basically the private key, or a lot of storage and a lot of time. With weak SSL implementations, one could store the intercepted data today, then later, if the private key is cracked or somehow obtained through the courts, the ciphertext could be decrypted. Now, that is unless a stronger SSL implementation is used using perfect forward secrecy. Now, perfect forward secrecy, or PFS, was invented even further back in 1992, and it provides a per-session encryption, meaning that obtaining the private key doesn't necessarily reveal the data, since a new key is generated for every single session. And now, while PFS actually predates SSL, it wasn't originally implemented in the SSL spec. Today, PFS is mostly hindered by, well, the browser and the sites. In tests of nearly 2.5 million SSL sites, Netcraft pointed out that Firefox, Chrome, and Opera only use the strong SSL technology about a third of the time. And more interestingly, Safari, the browser from the United States operating system vendor Apple, and Internet Explorer, the browser from the United States operating system vendor Microsoft, are actually nil, practically zero. And what's more, there's no way of knowing at a glance what cipher the SSL site's using. Now, while third-party browsers like Chrome and Opera prefer using PFS ciphers, it's pretty obfuscated. For example, in Chrome, all of the SSL connections are shown as a green HTTPS with a lock icon in the address bar, and only clicking on the lock icon will then reveal under the connection tab the crypto used. For example, if you're using Google Drive, it'll say the connection is encrypted using RC4-128 with SHA-1 for message authentication and ECDSA as the mechanism for key exchange. And it's like, what? And it's not just up to the browser though. The web server on the other end needs to support PFS ciphers too. Now the open source Nginx and Apache servers do a fairly good job of this, but get this, Microsoft servers, just like their browsers, fail to implement strong SSL crypto. Google, to their credit, uses PFS on their sites for clients using Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, but oddly not Opera. And interestingly, Google alternative DuckDuckGo, which promotes its anonymity, uses weak SSL crypto across the board. This means that if the NSA cracked every DuckDuckGo private key, or any SSL sites for that matter, or simply obtained it through a court order, or pulled it off a web server with a seizure, any traffic passed through these sites which are logged through the PRISM program could be revealed. Now, Netcraft provides the following conclusions for the tinfoil hat crowd. First of all, both Microsoft browsers and servers don't implement PFS, and Apple is only marginally better. Second of all, Russia, interestingly, is the home of the developer of the open source Nginx server, which does use PFS by default. And finally, nearly all of the companies involved in the PRISM program don't use PFS. Now, unfortunately, this isn't something that you can simply take into your own hands by using technology like a VPN. A better browser is a good first step, but ultimately it's up to the website operator to implement PFS, a task which can come with a huge performance penalty. Sites that use PFS can take 3 times the computing power to initiate an SSL session, and when you're a Facebook or a Twitter, that means many dollars worth of server upgrades. And one could possibly argue that many of the PRISM affected sites are simply saving money in an area where consumers aren't actually, demanding this technology. Most people on the web say, hey, if it looks like a lock icon and it smells like a lock icon, it must be secure, right? Well, a couple of years back, tools like Firesheep brought the risk of a man-in-the-middle attack against, say, Facebook and Twitter to the mainstream, and in response, those sites upped their game and finally implemented HTTPS, albeit weak. So perhaps it's time for everyone to just up their game again.
Thank you so much, Darren. Now, while the NSA-run PRISM is still in effect, there are some lawmakers who are trying to introduce more legislation to add accountability and oversee those surveillance programs. Senator Patrick Leahy introduced this legislation, saying the recent public revelations about 2 classified data collection programs have brought renewed attention to the use of government surveillance powers, which deserve close scrutiny by Congress. Now, the Patriot Act Section 215 allows the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to authorize broad warrants for records held by banks, doctors, and phone companies, etc., etc. No connection to a terrorist or a spy is required, just that it pertains to an authorized investigation. This proposal would require the government to show relevance to an authorized investigation, but also link to a foreign agent, power, or a group. And the government would have to provide a statement of facts or circumstances justifying the surveillance. Now, one really important part of the proposal is that it would require the FISA Amendments Act, which allows the U.S. government to eavesdrop on communications between American citizens with PRISM, to expire in June 2015 instead of June 2017. Now, last week we asked you about what your advice is. Do you have some more practical advice that we can use now that we know about PRISM? And our comment of the week comes from Super61. He says there are a lot of programs out there that can help you out. Tor, for example, which is one of my personal favorites. HTTPS is always around and will always be around. Chrome has some amazing privacy plugins and add-ons that will make surfing the web safe for you and a pain for the government. All it takes is a little time to seek it out. Which brings me to my question this week. I'd like to know, if you were a lawmaker, what impact would you like to make on PRISM and other surveillance programs out there? Demolishing them being the obvious answer to that question. Now let us know in the comments below, and remember, you can find all the ways to subscribe at threatwire.org. Make sure to get involved in our Google Plus community. It's very popular and it's outstanding. That's where the conversation continues all week. And with that, I'm Shannon Morse, and for Darren Kitchen, we'll see you on the internet.